Over the years, data played a vital role for problem solution and identity spaces. Therefore, pulselab Jakarta, a joint data innovation facility of the United Nations Global Pulse and Indonesia via the Ministry of National Development Planning, or BAPPENAS, functions as an analytic partnership accelerator. To mark a decade of pulselab Jakarta's operations and create wider impact, it transitioned to United Nations Global Pulse Asia Pacific. TVR World reporter Isa Fabian has more.
Celebrating a decade of impact and the launch of United Nations Global Pulse Asia Pacific was a two-day event held from June 22 to 23rd at the Westin Hotel, Jakarta, where pulselab Jakarta conducted panel discussions and held an interactive exhibition and also gala dinner that was attended by stakeholders, government institutions, and embassies from around the world. One of whom is the UN Resident Coordinator in Indonesia, Mrs. Valerie Juliand, who is joining us today to share her thoughts. Hi, Mrs. Valerie, how are you?
I'm very fine, thank you.
So can you share with us pulselab Jakarta's milestones over a decade and its impact?
Well, you see, exactly, it's a decade of work, so the milestones are many. But let's say the main focus with pulselab Jakarta has been to really be able to equip the UN with the necessary data so that we can support the achievement of the SDGs and make sure that we leave no one behind. So the main milestone of pulselab Jakarta, if I had to take a few, I would focus them on those groups of population that are usually left behind. Take the people with disability. pulselab Jakarta has really helped the UN system in expanding the database of people with disability, in identifying the data that is missing and the one we should work on. The same way pulselab has worked, for instance, on identifying the barriers for women entrepreneurs to be able to access the digital world. All this, and they have been really for the UN the main expression of the innovation data and analysis that we try to develop. So really, pulselab has been working in so many areas. It has supported the government as well, like for instance, helping the government in developing a mechanism to assess the contamination of COVID through the movement of people. So through the movement of people with their telephone, you could see where people were moving and therefore anticipate where there would be more COVID cases due to the massive arrival of people during the time of the pandemic. So you see, all this is the intelligent use of big data and of innovation. Like for instance, using the foresight. We have tools that enable us, while using this foresight analysis, to anticipate what could happen and be able to therefore have a policy approach or a strategy approach that is better targeted and that reflects better what the entity wishes to achieve.
Okay, and that was about pulselab Jakarta, and now it's being transitioned to Global Pulse Asia Pacific. What are the goals and the purpose for it?
Actually, Global Pulse Asia Pacific is, first of all, I would say, the natural growing of pulselab Jakarta. Pulselab Jakarta was focusing on Indonesia. UN Global Pulse Asia Pacific will, as its name indicates, be focusing on the Asia region, Asia Pacific region. And why we managed to do that, it's mostly because we have achieved so great result at the level of Indonesia that now we can expand and propose it to the entire region. But maybe I should take you just through a little bit of history, because Global Pulse at the UN level has been created to enable the UN, to equip the UN with the capacity to do data analysis and innovation at the service of development, of sustainable development. So when the lab was created 10 years ago, it was the beginning of this approach. But since then, of course, it has developed further. And we have learned from the experience of pulselab. So more or less, the expansion now, it's like, I would say, a very precocious and genius child who has grown and that is now almost an adolescent going to university, let's say. It's the same analogy I would do. So this is what UN Global Pulse Asia Pacific is. And we hope that it will serve equally the population of Asia Pacific the same way that it served the population of Indonesia through the UN.
Okay, so pulselab Jakarta with Indonesian government is a joint collaboration. How is it the Indonesian government takes part on the pulselab Jakarta?
Exactly, because we started with them. So they have themselves, the government of Indonesia, realized the strength, the power of such instrument. But also because the government of Indonesia has been generous to offer to host the regional entity that UN Global Pulse Asia Pacific represents. So they will have, in that sense, a very, I would say, privileged position, because this is the place where the, let's say, the seat of UN Global Pulse Asia Pacific will be. But at the same time, as I say, they will continue also to work with us in order to benefit also from advice and co-envisioning and co-strategizing the future.
Okay, so talking about the UN globally, what is the UN Secretary General, our common agenda, and the quintet of change capabilities, as it was one of the topic for the seminar for this event?
Well, I mean, our common agenda is actually the vision of the Secretary General on what more should we focus on in order to make sure that we achieve the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals started in 2015. And at the time, we had the hope that it would move further, faster. But there were a number of, let's say, accidents on the way. COVID pandemic, for instance, and now the crisis in Ukraine. With all these combined, plus, I would say, situation in individual countries, when we took stock of the situation of the SDGs, this is when we realized that actually, at the pace we go and the way things are, there is no way the SDGs will be achieved. There is a serious delay. So therefore, the Secretary General, through our common agenda, has indicated what are the necessary focus we need to have, such as continuing the focus on women, such as having a new agenda for peace, because of course we are in a situation now in the world where there are conflicts, such as capitalizing on youth, because youth are really the future. So all these aspects. And one of the aspects of our common agenda is that also with the UN, we have to change ourselves. Also with the UN, we have to adapt, because we were created 78 years ago. The world of today is very different from the world 78 years ago. And in order to be adjusted to our today's world, we need to have this capacity to anticipate changes and to be, I would say, attuned to all the information that goes around, to be able to extract from it what will guide our action to support development. And this is what the quintet of change capability is all about. This is about strategic foresight, be able to anticipate, having a number of tools and analysis. It is about behavioral science, because of course we need to know how people react in given situation. And you see, there are many, I would say, established beliefs that we had on how the world, how humanity function, and that have been challenged lately. We realize that the world is not the same. People do not necessarily react as we could think before. This includes, of course, data innovation, because now data is everywhere, you know, the phone and so on and so forth. And the innovation, because we see with artificial intelligence and so on, how the world will be impacted. So that includes all those aspects. And of course, to be results oriented. Because what we want with the new UN, what we call UN 2.0, is to be able to be an even more efficient UN, more attuned to the needs of today, but making sure, above all, that we leave no one behind. Because at the same time, the way the world has evolved, the way, let's say, the countries have developed, the world has grown. There has been more and more, I would say, economic growth, more and more capital being produced on the planet, but inequalities have also increased. And in the process, people with disability, women, rural communities, elderlies, you name it, people, indigenous people, they have been left behind. There are still, in all the countries of the world, people who are literally left behind. So therefore, all this exercise is also to make sure that using all these tools that I mentioned, when we mean development and sustainable development, we don't only mean sustainable development from an environment perspective, but also a development that benefits everybody. Because a development that does not benefit everybody, then it's not development.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Valerie Julian, for sharing your thoughts. It's very insightful and gives us like a hope. It's a hopeful that no one gets left behind. Okay, that is my report, Aisha Fabian, and our camera person, Roy, reporting for TVRA World.